Utah Jazz basketball, because one of the things that I think is so interesting is the fact that the Utah Jazz are, in fact, the talk of NBA Summer League. And usually if you said, well, the Utah Jazz are leading the headlines, you'd be thrilled with that. But for some reason, for somehow, and for some way, and I really don't understand it, the Utah Jazz seem to be the talk of the NBA Summer League, but for all the wrong reasons. This Brian Windhorst story yesterday that lit the NBA world on fire, where he said that Danny Ainge no longer believes in Donovan Mitchell to be that foundational player. I can tell you unequivocally, I was told yesterday by a source at the Utah Jazz that is simply a fabricated story, that is not true in any way, shape, or form. And I think one of the things that validates that is the other day, Eric Walden, during the media session that Danny and Justin Zanuck had, the general manager of the Utah Jazz, Eric Walden tweeted an answer about how the Jazz can see a future with Donovan Mitchell at point guard. So this is what is happening with the Jazz. And Jake, I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it seems like one day the story is X and then the next day it's Y, and it seems like everybody's flipping. Why do you think the Jazz are the talk of the NBA Summer League?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's because of the situation that they're in as far as like whether it's a rebuild or a retool, and you traded Rudy Gobert, and a lot of people nationally think that Rudy Gobert was the best player on the Utah Jazz and that Donovan Mitchell is somehow a tradable commodity that the Utah Jazz don't want. And so I think it's really easy when you don't follow this team and you're looking at it from a 1,000-foot view to say, oh, well, they traded Rudy, so they're probably going to trade Don, and they're going to get involved in this Brooklyn situation, and that's just what happens nationally. And I think that it is frustrating. It is hard to listen to. I won't lie. Like last night, watching the Summer League and watching Jared Butler, put up brick after brick last night, listening to this broadcast talk about, just Mark Cuban and all the Donovan stuff. And it's just like gets old. And I'm just like, man, like Donovan hasn't asked for a trade. There's no proof or evidence that the Utah Jazz don't want to keep working with Donovan Mitchell. Yet all we hear about is Donovan Mitchell leaving for Miami or Brooklyn or New York or any of these other major cities. And I think that if you're the Utah Jazz, I know for a fact, based on what we're being told, that they are frustrated a bit with some of the reporting this offseason and kind of how it's been handled and what's been said. And so, yeah, I mean, why are they the talk of the NBA Summer League? Because I think everybody thinks that Donovan Mitchell is just this player that the Utah Jazz are willing to trade, and that the Utah Jazz are just some little kid on the block essentially when you compare them to other NBA teams. And that, to me, is what I think the core issue is for the Utah Jazz as far as the national media is concerned. Everyone looks at the Jazz and says, "Oh, well, it's Utah. Like they're going to rebuild." Well, that's not necessarily true. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to me that you would bring in Danny Ainge to rebuild, to tear it down, to be the number one overall draft pick style of team.
No.
What makes sense is retooling it and doing it in a way where you keep the best player on your team and then put better talent around him. That's what makes sense. And I feel like that's what the Minnesota trade allowed them to do. So I just think that, when there's quiet, when there's nothing happening, when we're all sitting here thirsting for another trade for the Utah Jazz to be involved in, this is what happens. People just say stuff, and then we're left to speculate on it, and that's the trouble with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is painfully obvious is that the Jazz don't have that built-in level of respect. And to your point last night, I'm sitting there watching the game, and you're getting, Mark Cuban's this, and Mark Cuban's done a great job. And
he's the best ever.
Look, there's Michael Finley. Oh, my gosh. And it's just this over-the-top, overwhelming love affair with Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks. And yet, what are you talking about with the Utah Jazz? Oh, well, Donovan Mitchell, they don't believe in Donovan Mitchell. And Brian Windhorst, our very own Brian Windhorst, had a story. And I just don't understand it, because there's been no indication, none whatsoever, from the Jazz that they no longer believe in Donovan Mitchell. We've told you for weeks and weeks and weeks now, the Jazz have no intention of trading Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
We've told you almost every team in the NBA has called. The Atlanta Hawks are the latest team that I've heard that have called repeatedly about Donovan Mitchell. The Miami Heat, the New York Knicks. I mean, all of these teams calling repeatedly about the Jazz. about Donovan Mitchell, and they've said at every turn, we're not trading Donovan Mitchell. And whether that is right now, whether that is before the season, they're not trading Donovan Mitchell at this moment.
Right.
And you have Danny Ainge saying in a press conference the other day, or Justin Zanuck saying in a press conference the other day, that they're open to putting Donovan Mitchell at the point. But yet the national media continues to drive this point that the Jazz are trying to offload Donovan Mitchell, that, you know, they don't like Donovan Mitchell, that they don't believe he's a championship player. And I just don't understand. And is slander probably too strong of a word? It is. But that's what it feels like. And, you know, I don't think this is being a victim or playing the victim card. I think this is, you know, the absolute fact of the matter. That when you get people nationally talking about the Utah Jazz, it's almost always in a negative light.
Yeah.
And while I don't believe that nationally they're trying to get Donovan Mitchell out of Salt Lake City, I think that the national narrative starts to wear you down a little bit.
Right.
And I think I can't imagine Donovan Mitchell's happy to hear this.
No, and I think what's really interesting is like when you contrast what's said about the Utah Jazz and what is said about, let's just take the Lakers as an example. I mean, this applies to many teams, but just the Lakers as an example. Last season, Russell Westbrook was an absolute disaster. That's no secret. Everybody knows that. But when it came out that they hired Darvin Ham and that Ham has a whole plan for Russell Westbrook and they're gonna run it back with these three, what did we get? Well, Anthony Davis is in the gym at 4:50 in the morning and he's shooting free throws and he's gonna be everything that he's ever needed to be and ultra positive. This is great. Everything's awesome. But then you look at the situation in the coverage with the Utah Jazz and we get negativity. And this is kind of what, when I talk about on the show in the past, and for those of you who have listened for a long time, this will be familiar for you. But when I've mentioned like, hey, Donovan needs to step up. Donovan needs to become like this next level guy personality-wise in the media. He needs to take control, you know, of the image of the team on the floor in a sense, where it's like, when someone goes on ESPN or whatever and talks about the Utah Jazz, they think about, hey, Donovan Mitchell is the guy here. This is his team. Not, hey, Donovan Mitchell's looking to play for the Knicks or the Miami Heat or you know, whoever, or the Brooklyn Nets in a trade. That's the thing that I think needs to happen this season. And I know, like, for a long time, we've been saying, like, since last December, we've been saying for like 8 months that they're going to build around him. They're not trading Donovan, and I still believe that today. But I've also said, and I still believe that Donovan's got a lot of work to do this coming season to take control of the narrative of this team, to start to inflict his will and how he wants to do things here. And that, to me, may be the most important thing that Donovan Mitchell could do this coming season.
Yeah, I think this is the most important season to date for Donovan Mitchell. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I also don't think that Danny Ainge has wavered on Donovan Mitchell at all. And when we talk about whether or not Danny Ainge believes in Don, that's an incredibly important conversation. I mean, this year is really an important season for the organization on the whole. If you think about, you know, the move that they made to trade Rudy Gobert, I mean, you're talking about a transformative move. You're talking about a moment in time for your fan base. You add that to, you know, Ryan Smith, this uniform rebrand thing that they've done. Mm-hmm. You look at what has not happened, the level of apathy from fans, the expectation that you won't win, the All-Star game coming to Salt Lake City in February. Like, you have all of this stuff happening, and yet here we are in Summer League talking about the CEO of the Utah Jazz not believing in Danny Ainge. And I actually don't believe that story is true. I think that Danny does believe in Don. I think they may try him at point guard. And frankly, I think this is a valid conversation. I think there is a lot of meaning behind, should Donovan Mitchell be your full-time point guard? Mm-hmm. Is he a guy that can bring the ball up the floor every single trip? I think he is. Is that his highest, best use? I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. But more time for Donovan on the ball, I think, is actually a good thing. But I actually disagree with what you said in the important pre-show meeting.
The pre-show meeting
about the Utah Jazz, and that is that you said to me when I said, "Hey, well, can Donovan be a point guard?" You said, "Well, look what happened to Book."
Yeah.
You think those two situations are comparable?
Yeah, I think they are. I think that Devin Booker for a long time, or not a long time, but, you know, a season or two, was asked to bring the ball up and be a point guard. And that's just simply not his highest or best use. I think that it puts him in a position where he's constantly battling to get up the floor. He's getting the offense initiated. I would rather have Devin Booker being the guy that's waiting for the screen and coming off that pick in a position to shoot the basketball. That's what I want my scorers doing. I don't need my scorers running point. Now, that said, I think the big difference here, the obvious elephant in the room, is style of play and build of player. Devin Booker is 6'6", I think he is, and Donovan Mitchell is a much shorter player. So I think that as far as using him and like how that all pans out, I think that Donovan is size-wise a prototypical point guard in the NBA. The problem is he's a lethal scoring threat, and that's why I want him off the ball. I want him being put in positions and matchups where he can go and get his. I mean, that's what, to me, Donovan Mitchell is, and I just think that putting him on the ball, having him bring the ball up, while you can do it, and I'm sure he'd do a damn good job of it, I just think it's a better way to use him, to have him coming off the ball and to have whoever bring the ball up. I mean, again, obviously whoever brings the ball up has to take care of the ball and get you into your offense, but that's really not asking that much, in my opinion. To bring the ball up and make one pass to Donovan, I don't think is asking that much. So I just think that, to me, it's not that he can't do it. It's not that it's a horrible thing to have him do it. I just think the best way to use him is to put him in positions to score the basketball, because that's what he does. That's what he's always done throughout his career. There's a Twitter video going around right now of Donovan Mitchell's summer league highlights of him just tearing people up when he was a youngster in the league. Like, that's the mentality he has. So I just think that's how I'd use him.
Well, I think Donovan's highest best use, I would agree, is a two guard. But whether it's one or two, I mean, the positions in this league right now are so hybrid that I don't necessarily believe that it's a bad thing to have Donovan as your point guard. Because the five guys that are going to start on the floor every night, I don't necessarily know that you number them anymore in this league. And my feeling is that having Donovan on the ball more than not, I think is very good for the Jazz. I think Donovan Mitchell obviously is a gifted scorer. You're looking at him right now like he's on vacation in the islands working with his trainer, this will be the second time he's done that. You know, he spent a lot of time in New York. You know, he spent a lot of time in the lab. He's got 2 full months here in July and August to really get his body ready and get his game ready for October. So for my money, yeah, I think Donovan is building himself in that light. And again, I think we've been told repeatedly on this show that Donovan and the Jazz are in constant communication. So he clearly knows what his role is going to be going forward. And I think, by the way, a lot of this goes to bed when the trade cycle gets back and going.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that is happening to the Jazz is that the Nets have an extremely high asking price for Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, because what that's doing is that is driving a wedge into the wheel that's not allowing the trades to happen right now, because everybody wants Kevin Durant. And I think that once the trade wheel starts spinning again, all of this goes away, because they're either going to keep Don or they're going to trade Don. And when one of those two things happen, if this Kevin Durant trade goes down without Donovan Mitchell involved in it, I just don't see a way that the Jazz trade him. I really don't. And as far as this idea, there was this ridiculous trade rumor yesterday that had the Utah Jazz trading Donovan Mitchell in a 77-team trade. It was like a 4-team trade.
Right.
But essentially, the centerpiece of that deal is Kevin Durant to Phoenix. It would be Donovan Mitchell to Brooklyn and Ben Simmons to the Jazz.
Right.
And the thing that stands out to me, and the thing that I said yesterday on Twitter is, and why this is so ridiculous, is because how are you, as Danny Ainge, the CEO of the Utah Jazz, one of the guys that I consider to be the most savviest operator in front office circles in this league, how are you going to justify to your fan base? And I don't care if you get 20 draft picks. How are you going to justify to your fan base trading your best player, one of your most popular players, for Ben Simmons? And who is Ben Simmons? As a player, he's a guy who doesn't shoot. And notice I didn't say can't shoot. Ben Simmons is a guy who does not shoot. Mm-hmm. Ben Simmons is a guy coming off of major back surgery in May. He's a guy battling mental health issues, and he hasn't played in over a calendar year. How are you going to justify that? How are you going to sell that to your fan base? I don't think that you can sell that to your fan base and reasonably expect them to embrace that. And frankly, I don't think that's a rebuild. I think that's a tank, and I just don't see Danny Ainge, frankly, and I don't see Ryan Smith tanking this team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him tanking the team either, but I agree. Like, I think, that particular trade scenario, you're just simply sending the message that, whether you want to call it tanking or rebuilding, like that's what you're doing. And again, the other issue with the Ben Simmons situation is who the hell knows if Ben Simmons would even accept playing in Utah. I mean, again, that's not guaranteed. So I just think that particular deal that we saw running around, as far as draft picks and capital and being a rebuilding team, a team that's chasing the number 1 overall pick, yeah, I mean, it's a good deal from that standpoint, but I'm certainly not making that deal.
No, it's not.
Well, you
No,
disagree.
it's not.
I think it is. I think it's a perfectly fine deal if you're looking to be the worst team in the league and rebuild.
So this is from the New York Daily News, and I tweeted this. It's on my Twitter. You can find my Twitter, The Monty Show, Monty. The Monty Show is where you find me on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I tweeted this, and I think this is an absolute disaster, worst-case scenario for the Jazz. And again, you totally disagree with me on that.
Completely
you
disagree.
Totally disagree with me on that.
Yeah.
And okay, here's the trade that the New York Daily News is proposing.
Right.
They're proposing the Nets receive Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and a 2023 first-round pick. Mm-hmm. The Jazz would receive Joe Harris, injured and an inconsistent performer.
Just read the trade.
The last 2 years.
Read the trade.
Ben Simmons.
Right.
Cam Thomas, unproven rookie. Buddy Hield at this point a journeyman. 3 draft picks unprotected. A top 5 protected pick in 2029. Mm-hmm. And note I said top 5 protected in 2029. That's 6 years down the road. 7 years, excuse me. And 2026 and 2028 first-round pick swaps. Mm-hmm. That's the deal for the Jazz. That's a freaking disaster. Because think about, what is Buddy Hield? Buddy Hield is a shooter who is wildly hot and cold, inconsistent, up and down.
Way more athletic than Bojan Bogdanovic ever will be.
But Bojan's a superior shooter to Buddy Hield, in my opinion. And by the way, ain't like Buddy Hield's out there defending any better than Bojan did. Buddy Hield's not a good defensive player. The gem there is Ben Simmons and Cam Thomas. Because, frankly, the draft picks are meaningless when you're talking about 23, 25, and 27. I mean, okay, that's great, but look at the teams you're getting that from, right? I mean, you're from Phoenix. Those are not great picks, because Phoenix in this trade, by the way, is going to end up with Kevin Durant. And to me, if Phoenix ends up with Kevin Durant and Miles Turner from Indiana, that's a championship caliber team for the next 3 years.
But why do the Jazz have a problem with that?
Because it kills their draft picks. If you're taking Phoenix's draft picks, that's not in the top half of the league. Mm-hmm. So why would you want that? This is a terrible trade. This is a terrible trade for the Utah Jazz. The only guys you're interested in that deal, in my opinion, are Cam Thomas and potentially that 2023 first-round pick. But they're going to the NBA Finals, so that's going to be a terrible pick. The only thing that does is give you more trade ammunition. That's the only thing that does. And by the way, if you got to go out and make more trades because you just made a trade, should you make that trade in the first place? I don't think you should. I think that is a terrible trade. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Why do you like the trade?
I like the trade if you want to be a rebuilding team. If you want to go and chase the number 1 overall pick, I think it's a perfectly fine trade. Cam Thomas is going to be a good player in this league. Joe Harris is a proven contributor that's had some injury history over the last year or so. Joe Harris was a commodity for the Brooklyn Nets 2 seasons ago. I mean, we know what Joe Harris is. He can shoot the hell out of the basketball and can make some plays for you. So Joe Harris, I have no problem with Joe Harris on my team. The interesting part is Ben Simmons. I don't know if Ben Simmons would want to be a Utah Jazz man. I'd have to know that before I execute this trade.
But forget that part of it. Forget what Ben Simmons wants. Would you want Ben Simmons? Say he's all in. Is he going to play? I don't know. The Nets traded for him thinking he was going to play. He was physically ready to play, and then he had an anxiety issue and could not play. So your season went into the tank. So you're going to trade that guy for Donovan Mitchell. There and I guess this is where the rubber meets the road. What is Ben Simmons' trade value?
I don't know. We don't know what his trade value is. The point is that your expectations of this trade are in a Donovan Mitchell situation are to get some star player back, which is never going to happen.
You have to.
It's never going to happen. That's not how Donovan Mitchell trades work. Again,
I disagree 100%.
The teams know. Listen, other teams on the other end of the phone know that Utah has nothing to leverage them with. Nothing.
Well, they do now.
I don't think what do they have? I mean,
they have a
picks.
ton of draft capital.
They have picks, sure, they have picks, but is let's say they did a deal with Miami. The Utah Jazz have no way to go to Miami and say, hey, if you want Donovan Mitchell, you're gonna have to give up Jimmy Butler. Miami doesn't have to do that.
You're not trading Donovan Mitchell for Jimmy Butler. If you're gonna trade Donovan Mitchell, and I guess this is the disagreement, and this is when you look at trades nationally and you look at trade rumors nationally. This is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
You don't trade Donovan Mitchell for an older star player. That doesn't make any sense. You don't trade Donovan Mitchell for a guy on the same level. I trade Donovan Mitchell to a team that's going to give me draft picks and a star player. In this case, the Brooklyn Nets are making the argument that Ben Simmons is a star player, and he's not.
Is Donovan Mitchell a star player?
Yes, absolutely he is. He is in my opinion, and again, I agree, I totally overvalue Donovan Mitchell more than most. One of the NBA guys I talked to yesterday told me I was crazy when I said that I think Donovan Mitchell's a top 20 player in this league. I do. And I honestly, I think I could make the argument I could push him into the top 15 pretty easily. Donovan Mitchell. I think I could do that. But when you look at what people think of him nationally, they're only looking at what happened last year.
Mm-hmm.
And this team was a farging mess last year.
I agree with that.
So last year really doesn't mean anything. And the other issue here is, what are you truly getting if you're the Brooklyn Nets in this trade? And again, this is an NBA writer, Christian Winfield, making this trade up. It's a hyperbole.
There's no traction to it.
Hey, it's not even a rumor. It's just this is the trade I would make. The Nets get Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mikal Bridges, and Cameron Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting a haul for Kevin Durant. A haul. How is this at all balanced? If you're Indiana, here's the other part. The Pacers get DeAndre Ayton and Mike Conley.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get any draft picks.
That's
nothing.
what I'm saying. Do you see what's happening in these trades? This is where we need to be on the same page. This is not a trade where the Utah Jazz are trying to get equal value back. That's not what this particular scenario is. We're not having a conversation about, hey, the Jazz need to get equal value back for Don, Mike, and Bogey. The conversation in this particular scenario, to me, based on what this scenario is, hey, the Jazz are trying to tear it down and rebuild and basically start over in this particular scenario. I don't actually think they're doing that in the real world, by the way. I just want to clarify that. But in this scenario, that's what this is. So when I look at these trades, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, this is some horrible trade, because from where you would be operating from if you're the Utah Jazz and you were to do this, that's the value you're going to get back. Like, you're not going to get some star player. And I agree with what you said that, hey, Brooklyn overvalues Ben Simmons. I agree. Ben is unproven, but he has upside at least, But the issue is that this is a deal that's built to allow the Jazz to tear down and start over. That's what it is.
All right, let's get some of your comments in here. And I guess the question is, real quick, do you think that's a significant return for Donovan Mitchell?
No, I don't think. No, that's not what I said. I don't think it's a significant return. I think it's the return you're going to get when teams know you're tearing it down. Because remember, who are they losing in that trade? Don, Mike Conley, and Bojan Bogdanovic. So you're tearing your team down. You're moving on from what your team was.
I just think that is a horrible trade. That is a horrible trade. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. I know we have a ton of comments this morning. I really appreciate all of you being here. Steve Hambone, first one in. Rec 1, good to see you. Mike Phillips, good to see you. Neville93, my guy, good to meet you the other day. BB says, why when I hear about the Jazz going after Durant, are we giving up Donovan, but no other team is giving up their best player?
Well, okay. But again, see, this I don't understand why this is so difficult to understand. The Jazz are not going to get another team's best player back when they're trying to tear it down. That's why the Jazz would make this deal. This isn't a deal the Jazz would make if they're trying to contend.
This isn't a retool deal. This is a burn it to the ground
deal.
Hey,
we're burning it down. We're having a fire sale. Take all our people. Give us all your picks. That's why it's a good deal.
I just don't see them. I don't see them tanking.
No, I don't. That's what I'm saying. I don't think they're doing this deal.
Yeah.
I think they're retooling. They're going to build around Donovan Mitchell, and they have a ton of young talent. By the way, finally, is it lost on anybody that finally nationally people are saying that Jared Vanderbilt is the dark horse of this trade? We said that on day one when this trade happened.
Well, Justin Fulmer said that the same thing. He said, "Morning, fellas. After watching all the highlights I could possibly find on Jared Vanderbilt, I am very excited to have him on the team. When healthy, he's all over the place. His motor and IQ are great." Yeah, totally agree.
Yes.
Totally agree. Tanner Plummer says, "LOL, I don't get it, BB. There are a lot more famous people on this show." What do you mean?
What's going on?
BB says, Tanner is like the most famous guy on the show. Could be.
Guys.
Greg Hawkins says, "Sup, y'all?" Greg Hawkins sent me a story in the middle of the night because Greg's in the Philippines, for those of you who don't know. And somebody asked me yesterday on DM if Greg's legitimately a movie star. Yes, Greg Hawkins is legitimately a TV and movie star in the Philippines.
Google him.
You should. He's a remarkably talented actor. He's not very good looking, frankly. But then when you put anybody next to me, you're not.
His standards don't matter.
Man, look at this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Idiot.
But Greg's actually a very good looking human. That's probably awkward now. Anyway, the point is, in the middle of the night, hey, baby. In the middle of the night, Greg Hawkins sent me a story about a Subway worker recalling an order. I'll have a foot-long white bread with extra provolone, extra Swiss, and an entire large bottle of ranch dressing. That's all I want on my Subway sandwich. Thank you. That's disgusting. Although I did say to him, that woman's my soulmate, because I do love some ranch dressing. Good morning, Chacon, my guy, or Chiron, 26. How we doing, brother? Doing well, thank you. James Jensen says, retire the number 27. Stop it.
I'm tired of hearing this conversation. I agree that Rudy Gobert is one of the best players in Utah Jazz history. I agree. I wouldn't retire his number.
No.
Sorry, man. You didn't win anything. You didn't do anything that was like, game-changing for the Utah Jazz. You have some stats to lean on. You have some impact on the floor. But Karl Malone did more than you, man. I can't get to the point where I'm like, yes, we need to retire his jersey and put him in the rafters. I can't do that.
Yep, I agree. Blind Swordsman DS says, if Danny doesn't believe in Mitchell, I don't believe in Danny. Sorry, not sorry. By the way, for the record, and I want to clarify this, nobody at the Jazz has ever told me they are trading Donovan. Not one time in the years that I have been talking to people at the Jazz now.
Yeah.
Not one time, not a single time has anybody there ever told me that they don't believe in or that they are trading Donovan Mitchell. I have routinely heard that they get a ton of calls. The Knicks called them repeatedly at the trade deadline. The Heat have been very active. The Knicks have been very active. Atlanta has inquired.
Yeah.
Just about every team has inquired about Donovan Mitchell multiple times for many.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jazz have always said no. I don't know where Brian Windhorst is getting his stuff from. And again, I think Brian Windhorst is a credible NBA insider at ESPN. Brian talks to a ton of people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody in this organization. And, again, I was talking to an agent over the weekend who said, that they're not trading Don. People have tried and they're not trading Donovan. So I don't know where Windy's getting his information from, but Brian Windhorst on ESPN yesterday said that he's hearing around the league that Danny Ainge doesn't believe that he can build around Donovan Mitchell. And then just previously the day before, the Jazz said, yeah, we see him as our point guard of the future. So I don't know.
That's why I say,
I don't know.
Again, and I'll speak for myself. I don't have any affiliation. I do respect Brian Windhorst's work, but I'm of the opinion that some of this stuff is conjecture, because you don't say a week ago or maybe 10 days ago that the Utah Jazz are trading Donovan Mitchell and Don wants to leave and, basically that it's over. That's essentially what he was talking about, running out conspiracy theories on ESPN, right? That's what we had 10 days ago. Then we get, actually, Don wants to be here and Danny's not moving them and they're rebuilding. And then we get Danny doesn't think he can build the team around him. And that's why I say,
Bro,
nationally, like the media just doesn't get it.
Are you going to keep pounding on your microphone?
Yes, I am, bro.
Stop. Jeez Louise. Daniel Westover says there is a feeling around the league is code for we don't have definitive sources, but want to speak this into existence.
Yes.
Guys like Brian Windhorst have a ton of sources. I mean, having worked at ESPN, I can tell you that there is a very high editorial bar. Guys like Adrian Wojnarowski don't just throw stuff against the wall. Guys like Windy don't just throw stuff against the wall. Guys like, Tim McMahon, Dave McMenamin.
But do you at least agree you can't have it both ways as far as reporting on the Utah Jazz?
And Brian Windhorst has flipped back and forth multiple times over the last 2 weeks. That they're trading Donovan Mitchell. They're not trading Donovan Mitchell. They're trading Donovan. Like, he's gone back and forth. And now all of a sudden he rolled out they don't believe in Donovan Mitchell and they're going to trade him. Like, I agree. But I'm telling you, I have been there. If you're going to say I have sources, you have to clear those sources through somebody else. There is an executive producer. Every guy has a producer. Every guy has a boss. And you're going to have to clear those sources through that boss. Whether you look at what they went through with Adam Schefter, trust me when I tell you, there is an editorial process in place at ESPN that does not allow guys like Brian Windhorst or Adrian Wojnarowski to simply tweet, I have sources. It doesn't work that way. Are there people out there that do that? Yes, there are. But trust me when I tell you that when you work at the level that guys like Brian Windhorst work at, when you have the success that guys like Brian Windhorst have had, do you understand the damage that is done to your reputation when you do things like that? And, a guy on Twitter yesterday was like, well, why don't you call Don's agent? Why don't you call Rudy's agent? Why don't you talk to them? We have. We do that on a regular basis. There is, and I wish people understood the effort that goes into building a database of sources, building relationships with guys at the Jazz, with guys at BYU, with agents, with players. I cannot tell you how important relationships are in this world. They make the world go round. And guys like Brian Windhorst burning their relationships to make stories up is absolutely a non-starter at ESPN, and I just don't believe that Brian Windhorst does that. I would be stunned if he did that, because it's so, how do you make up a story about the Jazz and then go to a Jazz game? How do you do that? How do you ever call the Jazz again if you made up a story about they don't believe in Donovan Mitchell? Now, is there vagary much to Daniel Westover's comment here? There, quote unquote, there is a feeling around the league. Yeah, that's absolutely a vague tweet. It is. But I'm telling you, when you talk to people around the NBA, which I do on a regular basis, sometimes you don't get a lot of detail and you ask for a lot of detail and people are like, that's all I'm willing to say. Like, I spoke to an agent over the weekend and it was and I'm not going to say what it is because I couldn't confirm it, so I haven't tweeted it, but talking about trading one guy for another guy. And he said to me, I've heard that from fellow GMs. I've heard that from fellow agents and GMs that this trade is close. And I'm like, when you say close, what do you mean? And he's like, that's all I'm willing to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difficult situation. It's not an easy job, I guess is where I will leave that. Axel Granzini says 75 people listening. I remember when it was me and 5 other people. Axel, you've been here for a long time. Yeah. And we do appreciate that. And there's 161 people listening. So, Axel, we appreciate you very much, man. Let's see. Mike Maple says local media doesn't do enough to push back on ESPN garbage and make players question management. I agree. It was actually refreshing the other day to hear Andy Larson ask a pointed question at a press conference.
I'm not trying to be cryptic.
If this town needs more of that. This town needs, hey, Danny Ainge, somebody needs to walk up to Danny Ainge in Las Vegas and say, do you believe that you can build this team around Donovan Mitchell?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody needs to walk up to Danny and ask him that.
Yeah.
And somebody needs to walk up to Danny Ainge and say, how often are you talking about Donovan Mitchell in trades? Are people calling you regularly? Have you considered trading Donovan Mitchell? And let him say no comment.
Yeah.
Let him say, I'm not going to talk about that. You got to ask the question. You have to ask that question. By the way, just as a point, we have asked to talk to Danny Ainge. We have asked to talk to Ryan Smith. We have asked to talk to Justin Zanuck. They've all said no.
Yeah.
So we have asked, and we have been declined. So it's not as though they're readily available, but I can tell you, talking to agents of players on this team, talking to people inside the Jazz organization, they're getting calls on Donovan Mitchell almost on a daily basis.
And I think that's the thing. They're always going to get calls. I don't have any doubt that they're getting calls about Donovan Mitchell. I just sometimes I wonder, nationally, it's no secret that there's a lot of negativity around the Utah Jazz, but sometimes I just wonder, like why say something if it's not ironclad? Why say the feeling around the league is this, or I'm just not a big fan of vagary. There's a reason we only tweet things when we have them for sure, 100% confirmed, verified by multiple people, because that's the right thing to do. Now, ESPN's a TV product. I get it. That's part of it, but I don't know. I just didn't and haven't loved the timeline and how things have sort of happened with Brian and nationally, generally speaking.
Yeah. Totally agree. Spencer Morgan says, Monty, were your sources within the team telling you Rudy trade was coming? Obviously, we all knew it, including you guys, but were they saying it to you? Yeah, I vividly remember a conversation, I don't know, it must have been a year and a half ago at the trade deadline, not this past one, but the one before, where somebody said, one of the guys I talked to at the Jazz was telling me, I vividly remember him saying a year from now, Rudy's going to be gone. A year from now, Rudy's going to be gone. And it was like momentum built. And what happened was we were in LA a couple of 6-8 months ago at one point. And one of the guys I talked to around the NBA said, hey, by the way, they're really close on a Rudy Gobert trade. They're talking to this past deadline. Hey, they're talking to people.
Right.
And when I called the guy at the Jazz, he said, this is what I've been telling you for a year now. We're going to trade him. He is being talked about. And it's never been a question of, will it happen? The moment Rudy signed that contract, it was, when are we going to wind up trading him? Because I got to be honest with you. Nobody at the Jazz outside of Dennis Lindsey was in favor of that deal.
Mm-hmm.
Quinn Snyder didn't want that deal. Justin Zanuck, him and Hod. Justin Zanuck sat on the fence on the Rudy Gobert contract. He did not rubber stamp that deal oh, yeah, let's do this. That Rudy Gobert contract was a gift wrap deal from Dennis Lindsey to Rudy Gobert. And Ryan Smith at that point was really not in a position to say no.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Spence, for the better part of a year, we were being told that this is happening. They're going to trade him. And then when we got into November, December, we were trying to, for the month of December, pretty much for the most part, the first 2 weeks leading up to Christmas, we were trying to confirm, double source, hey, they're coming apart in the locker room. Hey, there is, because we had heard early on in training camp, I believe it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we had heard early on in training camp that Rudy Gobert was much more vocal last year.
Yeah.
He was really vocal last year.
Well, and the dynamic you have to remember is that Rudy has a ton of relationships nationally or internationally with Team France, with people like Evan Fournier, and he's got, obviously, he's got a ton of NBA connections, but specifically the guys on Team France were telling him, hey, you got to be more vocal. This is your team. You're the best player on the team. You got to be more of a leader. Think it was kind of building in that way. And so, with that timeline you were just describing, we had kind of heard that in December that the rumblings of Rudy feeling hey, I'm not just a defensive guy. I don't like being the scapegoat, and I want to be more of a presence offensively. I want more opportunities on the block. I want more opportunities.
I want the ball.
Yeah.
I want the ball.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert's mantra the first half of last year is I want the ball. But that's when things started going bad. And again, I know that people hate, but Spencer's asking me about it. I know that people hate when I say, oh, I told you. But we started hearing, and then we heard in December, middle of December, when we had gotten news that Danny was going to take that job. We had that story about 10 days, but nobody at the Jazz would confirm that for us, that Danny was going to officially be the guy there. But as soon as we heard that, They went to Donovan, as I was told, and said, hey, we're going to build this team around you. We're going to do everything that we can do to put you in a position to win multiple championships, and we are going to trade Rudy. And it never stopped after that point. So, yeah, absolutely. We were being told by Jazz sources that they were trading Rudy Gobert.
And one note on that, that's why the confidence level of them not trading not trading Donovan is so high, because it doesn't make sense that with the way things have sort of like worked out, it's not just right now at this trade deadline we're saying, oh, it doesn't make sense. Like,
yes.
All the information we have going all the way back to then, bringing in Danny, like it all adds up to, hey, we need to build this team around Donovan Mitchell. That's our best opportunity, and that's what we're going to do. And that's why I say, like, when we're talking about this hypothetical tear-it-down trade, or like when you hear things nationally, you have to understand that you know, unless you cover this team really closely, and you have covered it for the last probably 15 months, 18 months or so, like the last year and a half, you don't understand the dynamic at play here. And that's why we're confident they're not trading Donovan.
Yeah, I just have, and again, I will just say that I've never heard from the people I talk to at the Jazz that they're willing to trade Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
And I think what Tony Jones has reported is the same thing that I've heard repeatedly. It would take a miracle offer. It would have to be every draft pick that we're allowed to trade by rule. The haul would have to be over the top incredible,
right, to
trade Donovan Mitchell. It would, and when we talk about what a star player have to come back in return, yes, a star play, like they're not going to tank. They're just not going to tank.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much more equivocal I can be about that my Jazz folks have been unwavering that they will not tank. Spencer Morgan also says, my point is I'm not sure it's safe to assume that if the Jazz were open to trading Donovan, your source would be telling you that. Oh, I think how do I put this? I believe in the guys I talk to at the Jazz have I mean, they told us Will Hardy was the guy, like, quickly.
That's why we had it on June 6th, definitively.
I mean, like, they told us, right, like, if you go back to the day that Quinn Snyder resigned, I talked to a Jazz guy an hour or so before that press conference or before that news came out. And he straight up said, we already are talking to Will Hardy. And he said to me, Danny's second guy is likely going to be Charles Lee. And I asked him about Johnny Bryant. And the answer was, well, he'll get an interview, but Will Hardy's probably the guy.
Yeah.
And he said something like, all things being equal, Will Hardy's going to get the job.
Yeah.
So my Jazz guys have not led me astray at all. And again, and I don't know where the comment is. Somebody was asking about, like, how did you build that bridge? I didn't build that bridge.
This is a common misconception.
It's not like we reached out to the Jazz and we're like, hey, bro, you want to have coffee and be our source? They called us.
Hey, guys.
The people we talked to, two different people at the Jazz called us. Not one, two called us. So it's not like we were just out willy-nilly dropping hundies all over the place buying information.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't work that way. Let's see. GS400 says, Trader Dan doesn't lose trades. Relax. That's what I said.
Yeah.
Danny Ainge isn't known for losing trades.
And that's why I say it's so unbelievable to me, again, nationally, that the Danny Ainge track record and what he's done isn't being more heavily weighed in what the reports are. Like, you have to understand, this isn't Danny's first time around the block. I feel like it's so obvious, but no one talks about it. And again, I just think people report that, hey, the Jazz are open to it, or Donovan wants to leave, or whatever version it is that Donovan's leaving, whatever it is, it seems to change every day. But they report that stuff because they don't understand the timeline and what's being done here and the vision for it.
Yeah, I think that nationally there is a big misconception about the Jazz.
Yeah.
I think the idea, the knee-jerk reaction after the Gobert trade was they're trading Donovan, they're tearing it down.
They're burning it to the ground.
But that's because you haven't you don't know how the Jazz operate. With all due respect to the national guys, the Jake Fishers, the Brian Windhorsts of the world.
Yeah.
I just feel like unless you're here on a daily basis, understanding how this organization used to run, like one of the things that people keep doing, and I think it's a huge mistake, you cannot continue to say, well, the Jazz have always operated that way. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Gail Miller doesn't run this team anymore.
Yeah.
She doesn't. They don't sell cars anymore. They win basketball games. That's their stated goal.
Yes.
So you can't keep saying, well, this is who the Jazz have always been. Well, actually, it's not. The Jazz, when's the last time the Jazz took a Rudy Gobert caliber player and traded him? Usually, and the other thing I hear is, well, Don's leaving eventually. They all do. Did Rudy Gobert walk away from the Jazz? He didn't. He didn't want to be traded necessarily. He was emotional after that trade.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert was traded because the Jazz needed to move his money.
And I think his comments in his introductory press conference with the Timberwolves,
as much said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he was spot on. I think the Utah Jazz no longer had a window to win games.
Yeah.
I think it's that simple. And by the way, I saw a bunch of people asking about the Kevin Durant trade.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Kevin Durant trade is a huge wedge in the wheel of the NBA. I think it's one of those things where you're holding up Indiana, Phoenix. I think you're holding up the Jazz to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're holding up the Lakers.
Yeah.
I think you are likely holding up the Miami Heat. I think there is almost no doubt in anybody's mind that you are holding up the New York Knicks, who'd like to make another move. I mean, all of the cogs in these wheels are currently bent. The spokes are all bent.
Yeah.
I keep going with wheel analogies.
Right.
But that I think around the NBA, everybody's waiting on the Brooklyn Nets because there is a disagreement around the NBA as well about whether or not the Nets want to trade Kyrie Irving first and whether or not they want to trade Kevin Durant first. And the common conception around the league or perception around the league is that they want to trade Kyrie Irving first because it gives them a little more leverage to go back to Kevin Durant. And that is assuming that Kevin Durant would even be open a little bit to staying in Brooklyn. I think they're grasping at straws there. I think if you trade Kyrie to the LA Lakers, which seem to be the only home for him, because it feels like Miami's not interested in Kyrie. By the way, another story that people ask me about all the time. Yeah, we had the Kyrie to the Lakers story first, and I'm thrilled about that, and I don't mind sticking my tail feather up about it. But he wants to go to LA or Miami.
Yeah.
And Miami doesn't have room, and I don't think wants to deal with a high-maintenance player like Kyrie Irving. I think the Brooklyn Nets need to trade Kyrie to the Lakers. They need to get extra draft capital. They need to buy out Russell Westbrook and then go back to Kevin Durant and say, hey, all right, James Harden's gone, Kyrie's gone, XYZ. Let's see what we can put together with you on the roster. Are you in or are you out? Nah, I'm still out. Okay, we're going to trade you to Phoenix.
Yeah.
I think that's what needs to happen. But I think for certain, I think Indiana would like to acquire DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah.
I think the Utah Jazz would like to acquire DeAndre Ayton.
Well, and it very much feels like a thing where, once one domino falls, we're going to get like 10 trades in one day.
And by the way, I'd be really surprised if the Jazz acquired Miles Turner.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have been asking me about the Jazz appetite on Miles Turner. I don't think one exists. I don't think the Jazz have an appetite to trade for Miles Turner. I think that he is, the Sabonis deal would be great. I think Sabonis is a really good player, and I think he fits right into what the Jazz do offensively. I don't think Miles Turner does. And this goes back to what sources were telling me that the Jazz would be open to bringing Hassan Whiteside back because I think Hassan makes a very nice number two off the bench.
Yeah.
If you can play him, if you can get more games from him, I think he only played 60-something games last year. You'd like your backup center to play 75 plus. But if they can have Hassan Whiteside on another, $1 to $2 million deal, if they can split an exemption to get him and another player on their bench, I think they do that because I do think they're going to acquire a big.
Yeah.
What that big is and what that big looks like, I don't know. But my feeling is that the Brooklyn Nets have got to make a move because time is running short.
Yes.
And by the way, I think this is also another important point. There is no timeline to trade Kevin Durant. I think they have until training camp opens. You can't bring KD and Kyrie to training camp as the locker room currently sits. I think you have too much tumult there. I think it would cut the knees out on Joe Tsai, the owner of that team. And I think that they would like to make that deal as soon as possible, but they're not just going to give Kevin Durant away for the sake of trading him because he asked to be traded.
Right.
That's not going to happen. But it's been explained to me multiple times. They're also not just going to trade him to Toronto, was the example we used. They're not going to trade him to Sacramento. They're not going to do that. They have a lot of respect for Kevin Durant, and the relationship is still good between the ownership, the management, and Kevin Durant.
Yeah, he did a lot for him.
Yeah, they're going to trade him to Phoenix if it's a deal that they can make and they can be satisfied. Kevin Durant's going to be a Phoenix Sun. It's a matter of where they end up and what happens in return, because I don't believe, and again, I've talked about this to 1,000 NBA guys, I don't believe Ben Simmons has trade value.
Yeah.
I think Ben Simmons is damaged goods until he proves otherwise. Had he played in the postseason this past season, I think they could trade Ben Simmons. But he didn't play, and the back injury is less of a concern than is his issue with mental health. Because you can't quantify or measure somebody's battle with mental health. It is a very personal, individual situation, and it requires you to have a lot of patience, and it requires you to give that player a lot of room. A team like the Utah Jazz doesn't have a lot of time for patience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't take that risk. And the other thing with the Jazz and Ben Simmons, his back injury is not something that you can just overlook. They cannot afford to bring in another player that misses 20, 30 games a year. It absolutely wrecked the Mike Conley relationship, his inability to be healthy in critical situations. Ben Simmons you can't take that risk on Ben either. So I think that's a major part of the conversation. Jeremy Bolton, good morning to you, my friend. He says, I'm so desperate for other sports right now, I might even have to listen to an RSL podcast. Well, hang on. We're going to talk Big 12, Pac-12 in a minute. Let's see. James Knight says Hassan Whiteside is a hack. Right, but he fills an incredible role, which is a shot blocker and a rebounder.
Off the bench.
And he's very good. Rudy Sanchez says, is John Collins still an option for the Jazz? I think John Collins is one of the guys that could potentially be in a Kevin Durant trade, because I think Atlanta would very much like to trade John Collins. But again, they had a deal done. I mean, the interesting thing is, I think the Jazz had a deal done in Phoenix. I think the Jazz had a deal done with Atlanta. And I think Atlanta was before Rudy. I think the Jazz had a deal done with the Bulls before Rudy. The Rudy Gobert changed their trajectory, and then the Kevin Durant situation happened, and everything's just kind of come to a halt. I think the Utah Jazz would love to add John Collins. I don't know that that's possible at this point.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
That's what I mean. That's why it's so tough right now, because it's just – there's so much happening behind the scenes that you know the media is not privy to, because again, like we said last week, Summer League, while yeah, sure, there might be basketball games going on, you might as well call them league meetings or executive meetings, because that's what's happening. All these guys are there talking, you know, conniving, if you will, putting deals together, figuring it out. Like, that's what Summer League is. And that's why I say, like, my instinct on this tells me that there's going to be a day sooner rather than later where we get, like, fireworks. Like, KD's deal goes down. Then we get, like, 5 other deals that go down.
I think a lot of people thought that was yesterday, and then the Nets didn't move. A lot of people thought that they had a 3-team deal done with the Nets, the Suns, and the Pacers, and that trade didn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
My guess is because the Pacers don't have enough to offer. So that's why I think everybody believes it's going to be a 4-team trade, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And Garcia, good morning to you, friend. He says, are we moving Conley? I would guess so. I would think that, yeah, you would probably trade Mike Conley. Would be my guess. Let's see. Jesus Christ destroys Marxism. Well, I appreciate the consistency in the name over 2 days.
Yes.
JCDM says, I don't believe that for 1 minute, especially after what Windhorst and Marks have said, that they have not been impressed with what Phoenix has to offer unless it includes Devin Booker. Well, they can't include Devin Booker, so Brooklyn is well aware that Devin Booker, A, cannot be traded for the next calendar year, B, that Ben Simmons and Devin Booker can't be on the same roster.
Yeah.
Unless they're traded for each other but then you wouldn't be on the same roster anyway because of the rookie exemption rule. So I think you need 4 teams to make this deal happen in order to get Brooklyn enough value.
Yeah.
Which again, I say is why you can't probably make a monstrosity trade with the Jazz. That doesn't make a lot of sense at all. Teddy Wayman, good morning to you, sir. Conley is probably going to be traded to Dallas. I would guess Dallas or the Lakers. It'd be Mike Conley's next spot. I could see a scenario where he ends up. There's a couple other teams that I think where he could potentially be a fit. I know Washington really likes Mike Conley, but at what level do the Jazz value Mike? I think if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was still on that team, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, but he's a Denver Nugget now. So I think that ship has sailed. But I also think there's some momentum in the Eastern Conference for Mike. I think Boston would really like to add another point guard. I think the New York Knicks would like to add another point guard. I mean, there's places where Mike Conley fits, but yeah, Teddy, I think Dallas would love to add Mike Conley. I mean, you've lost Jalen Brunson. You have to do something to backfill there. And Mike Conley's not a volume player. He's a guy that'll be fine as a distributor, and he's a guy that very much fits into the offense there. Because remember, it's not easy to play around Luka Doncic. I think he's a guy that hogs the ball a lot and shoots from like the upper deck and won't pass when he's triple teamed. There's not a lot of players who enjoy that. You know what I mean? Like there's just not. Lorenzo Miranda, I don't think Ben's that risky. We forget how young he is, and he hasn't even touched his prime years. But again, how do you quantify somebody's battle with mental health?
Yeah. That's
the hard part.
There's no doubt he's a risk.
And I don't say that about mental health as a stigma or to put him in a bad light. I think he is a guy that, frankly, when you're talking about paying a guy $20, $30, $40 million a year, you got to understand where he is mentally. And he was ready to play physically for Brooklyn and then had an anxiety issue. And I know that's HIPAA, Dak, but we don't play drops on the show anymore.
Well, we've had a very serious conversation today.
You know,
think that's HIPAA?
Yeah, it is HIPAA, Dak. But my point is, I don't think that you can just assume that. So I think there's a lot there. A couple more because I do want to get to football real quick. James Knight says, you just described Jordan Clarkson. Well, Luka and Jordan play a very similar, philosophical offensive game.
Philosophically speaking.
Philosophically speaking, it's, not a non-star. What is? Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. JCDM says, but who would Dallas send to Utah? Maybe Bullock. I think you're hoping for a draft pick there. I think you're not getting value from Mike Conley.
Yeah.
You're not getting Reggie Bullock from Dallas from Mike Conley. You're not. And Garcia says, just hit the like. Thank you very much. If you're here right now, 186 people watching the show, please give us a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. It is Jerry Tuttle also says, come on, guys, hit the like button. Yeah, seriously. 185 people and we have 31 likes. Please, let's get that number up. That really does help the channel grow. By the way, again, I would remind you that we're going to make your day on January.
Chill out.
October 7th and 8th. We are going to make your day. And I know Gabe Ledley, I'm not sure he's here. Gabe figured it out yesterday pretty quick. We have a huge promotion coming.
Yeah.
A huge promotion on this show is coming. We told you big things were popping on this show. October 7th
Much
and 8th.
like GMs and executives at Summer League, things are happening behind the scenes on this show that will roll out very soon.
Yes. So we appreciate that. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. You will have to be subscribed to make January, or why do I keep saying January? I got to stop smoking crack. Anyway, I don't smoke crack. I probably should. It would probably help me. But October 7th and 8th is going to be a very good day on this show, so make sure you pay attention for that.